Hi all, this is Alessandro. I'm a composer, sound designer, and product expert at Krotos. And today I have a great guest with me. She's a sound designer for theater and a very good one at that, so much that she's the first woman to win a Tony Award for the best sound design of a musical category. I have with me Jessica Paz.
Hi, how are you? Good to be here.
So today, we're just gonna have a very informal chat, learning a bit more about you. And for you, it's particularly interesting because you're a sound designer for theater, mostly, I guess.
Mostly, yes.
Exactly. And we have more to do with sound designers that work in audio post production. So I'm keen on learning about, the differences that I'm sure there are. Do you want to tell us a little bit on how you got started, how you got into the industry?
Oh boy, I actually started in a community theater as a volunteer. I like ran the fog machine when I was 19 or something, and they asked me to stage manage, and I started stage managing with them. And then there was a show that was having a particularly hard time with the sound, and I sort of hopped in and just started, twiddling knobs and seeing if I could make it better. And it got better. So I chose to start mixing that show and then started volunteering at a different community theater and eventually got into a paid position and became the sound designer there. Eventually, I answered an ad on some like list serve for a board operator for a play off Broadway for a man named Rob Kaplowitz, and I got the job. He then hired me to be his assistant and associate on subsequent shows. And eventually we landed Fela, which we did off Broadway, on Broadway, in Nigeria, in London, and took on tour both in Europe and the US, and also Australia and New Zealand later as a concert version. And from there, I started. I got more into music. I was working at a lot of music venues around New York, so Terminal Five, Knitting Factory, etc.
Is that like front of the house?
Yeah, exactly. So I was doing a lot of mixing for bands, etc. And there were like two bands that I actually was sort of full time with. So it was a few years, which is where I think I got my chops in terms of making a band sound good, because these venues have basically a box of SM57s and a console, and you just have to like use an SM57 on everything. So it's good training ground, I like to think. And then I got an assistant associate job at the Delacorte Theater working for Mark Menard. And I did that for 2 years, did a Broadway show with him, and he unexpectedly passed away. And then the public theater promoted me to designer of the Delacorte that next year. And so I designed there for 5 years. And somewhere in there, I also was introduced to Nevin Steinberg, who I was the associate for on Dear Evan Hansen and Bandstand. He was offered Hadestown, but wasn't able to be in Canada. So he sent me, and I did the show. And the next year, when it was to go to London, the producers, director, and Nevin all decided to make me the co-designer. And so I got a bump up there, and then we did it on Broadway, and the rest is sort of history.
That sounds amazing. It sounds like you've been at it for the entirety of your professional life. Can you tell us a little bit what is like specific about theater sound design?
I guess the thing that everyone finds most fascinating is that when you do a Broadway show, for instance, all you get is the theater. There is no speakers in the theater, there's no cable, it's four walls, audience, and a stage. And you have to bring in everything completely custom built. So every sound system for every Broadway show is completely 100% custom built. So there'll be a bid process where the designer will say, this is the equipment that we want, and the sound shops will bid on it, and a sound shop will be chosen. And then a team of people go into the sound shop and build every rack of equipment completely custom. They label every piece of cable, and that takes about 3 weeks. And they put it all together, they test it, and then they unplug it all. They put it in a truck and they bring it to the theater and they put it back together again in the space. Everyone seems to think, I don't know, they just find it absolutely fascinating that they didn't, like, most people don't know that it's completely custom built.
That's amazing. So, like, are you like the only decision maker when it comes to what sort of PA to hire and how to design the overall audio experience in the play?
Yes, and the director and orchestrator and composer will of course have their opinions, but in terms of the PA and the concept for the sound design, which the concept is worked on in connection with the director's vision as well, but in terms of what the PA ends up being, that's totally under my purview.
Yeah, I would imagine there is like a massive challenge when it comes to, depending on the theater, obviously, when it comes to sort of delivering the same experience to everybody in the room, I guess.
That's the goal. Yeah, that's the goal, is to make sure that everyone's having the same experience, or at least within a certain margin, because of architecture, etc. But within a certain margin, yeah, that's the goal.
That's cool. When it comes to workflow, I would imagine it's sort of very much dependent on how big the play is and how much budget you have, how long is going to stay in a specific theater. But how do you approach different projects? Can you tell us a little bit about what I guess you could call the pre-production phase of it?
Generally speaking, it starts with getting hired.
Yeah.
That's first. So you get hired, and then you'll sit down and have a conversation with the director, and you'll figure out, like, that's the first step, is to have a concept conversation with the director about what they're looking for. And if it's a musical, then of course you want to sit down with the writers and the composer and the orchestrators, etc., to understand what their vision and their goals are for the piece. In terms of, like, artistically, you choose what plugins you want to use for reverb processing sort of beforehand, but for me, a lot of that work starts happening on site once we get into the theater, right? There's things I may experiment with at home, but until I have the real actors with the real band, etc., it's hard to experiment with that. But in terms of sound effects, which I make a fair bit of, or music editing, the process may be, for instance, on this last play I just did, POTUS, with Susan Stroman, myself, the playwright, and Susan each made a Spotify playlist of songs that we think may have fit in the show. Curated those playlists down to, okay, this is appropriate for the show, this is not, this fits, this isn't. And then from there, I created these short, like 10, 12, 15-second vamps of music to use for the transitions, which I then sent into rehearsal, and they used in the rehearsal room. Eventually, Susan's team gave me a 2-page document of what song vamps they wanted to use for which transitions, and like what bar they wanted to cut it in at, and then I would cut together the music and then create the bumps at the end and make them fit, right? Even on a musical, a director may say, here's an album that is like the feeling that I want the show to sound like. So there's a lot of that in the process as well.
It's interesting that you're a customer of Krotos plugins. Is there a way they fit into your workflow?
I used Reformer Pro on a podcast I was doing because I needed to do Foley, and I had to make these fight sequences it was Romeo and Julieta, for the public theater, and I had to make these Foley sequences, and I needed like cloth moving, when the punches happened, etc., and so on. So I actually used Reformer Pro to help me accomplish that. Instead of copying and pasting cloth movements and each sample into the timeline, I just built an instrument that I then used and was able to manipulate, because I don't have a Foley studio here. This is a very, very small space. So I pulled a bunch of samples together, and I made some samples of myself in leather jackets and put that together, which was really great. And I used concept, yes, to help me create some of the drones behind the final scene in the play. It was raining, but there was like this ominous sort of background bed that was happening, and I used concept for that as well. I have used Weaponizer to make some sound effects. Absolutely.
Yeah, weaponizer is one of those things that has, weapon in the name, but actually is very useful for all sort of things. I use it all the time to design footsteps and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, and there is like again this performative nature of it, which comes very handy to speed up the workflow. I love one of the things that I'm been talking a lot with all the guests that I had is sort of the future of our profession. And again, this is very interesting talking about it in theater. And you worked on the largest musical, the biggest musicals and plays, and so you are in the perfect position to answer that. How do you see these your profession evolving, and how it also evolved compared to when you got started, for example?
Right now, I see us moving toward more digital technology, which is helpful because the FCC has taken so much of our bandwidth away. And so that's definitely, we're moving toward that in the future. Obviously, that takes time because all of we have to buy new equipment. The quality of speakers are increasing exponentially. The products that are coming out now are just absolutely stunning. Both D&B and Meyer, which are the companies that I use most often, are just putting out really, really stunning and absolutely wonderfully sounding speakers that use less power, have less output on their rear, so there's less noise being thrown back onto the stage, and just much cleaner sound. They're also coming out with digital products now as well. So instead of using copper to connect to it, it's just everything is on a network and it's all digital audio. And computers are getting faster. So we have more ability now to incorporate, at least for my workflow and my style, to incorporate more studio technique into our work because the computers can actually use plugins and process them in real time in a way that doesn't cause too much latency.
To conclude, I just love if you could, give a bit of advice to aspiring sound designers, especially people that are interested in theater.
The thing that worked for me is that I've done every job, right? I've pushed boxes, I've lifted speakers, I've rigged speakers, I've uncoiled and coiled cable, I've crawled underneath stages, I've stage managed, I've done props, I've done scenic painting, I've been a mixer, I've been an A2, which is who handles the microphones backstage with the actors, and I've been an associate, I've been an assistant, and now I'm a designer, right? So I understand how each of the jobs function. I know how to do those jobs, which means that I know how to communicate with my team, and help them to achieve the goal. So do every job, right? Say yes. Say yes. It's never going to hurt you to learn a new perspective, even stage managing, and to understand better what it is a stage manager does because you've done it will just make you able to communicate with the stage manager that much better. The other thing I would say is it's a piece of advice that my mentor Nevin, who was also my partner on Hadestown, it's a piece of advice that he gave me, which is that every time you enter the room, do it asking how you can help. And what I take that to mean is that it's not about you or your design, it's about the story and how you can help tell the story and how you can help the other people in the room to tell the story. The piece of advice I like to give is keep showing up. Keep showing up, not just for yourself, for your team, for the other creative team members, your directors, your other designers, show up for the actors, show up for the story, show up for the piece, show up for the playwright, but show up, show up fully. And if you keep showing up, right, people will keep hiring you.
I love all these three pieces of advice. Yeah, I'm going to apply them myself. Absolutely great. Thank you so much for taking the time. I hope it didn't take too long.
No, this has been great. Thank you so much for having me.